up on Sports Weekly. All the world's a stage as Toronto stretches to show us their best. We'll have a live report from Skydome. Our Sunday conversation features Game 2 starter Dave Stewart. At age 36, Stu has learned the power of positive thinking.
There's always a negative, and there's always something that I feel I have to turn into a positive. That's what keeps me going.
Alabama tried to keep its winning streak going, while Michigan was all tied up against Penn State. We'll look back at the uproar caused by Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the '68 Olympics. Did their mentor have his own agenda?
I think Harry Edwards exploited Smith and John, and he used them for his own movement.
You'll never be exploited on Sports Weekly's movement, although we could crash and burn at any time. A full hour is next.
Good morning, I'm Dick Schaap, and welcome to Sunday Sports Day, October 17th, 1993. 2 hours of news, views, reviews, and previews, highlights and sidelights, cheers and jeers. The World Series may be big news in Canada today, but in the U.S., it's Father and Son Day in football. The Bowdens, Bobby and Terry, sitting atop the football world, not a single defeat between them. Robin Roberts is with us, as usual, to lead us to our opening hour, Sports Weekly. And Robin, can you imagine Florida State against Auburn in the Sugar Bowl for the national title, Bobby on one side and Terry on the other?
Yeah, and Bo on one sideline and Dion on the other, two of your favorite people. I don't think Terry's mother, Bobby's wife, would be too happy with that matchup, but she doesn't have to worry about that for another year or two.
Well, she could root for a tie.
No, that's true. She could do that.
It's like kissing your mother.
Thank you very much. I'm not even going to attempt to do anything with that, Dick. Thank you for your brand of humor, as always. Well, thanks to the Phillies, Dion is working for his other employer in Atlanta, the Falcons. The Phillies didn't have much time to relish their stunning victory over the Braves. It's their turn to see what they can do against Toronto in the Fall Classic. The MVP of the NLCS got his lucky hat back from a fan just in time for the trip to Toronto. And then in the bottom of the third, Phillies up 3-2. Schilling doesn't get any help from his teammates. Devon White with a pop. Milt Thompson and Lenny Dykstra do not communicate. Thompson charged with the error. Jays would tie the game on a Joe Carter sac fly, and then Juan Guzman striking out Ricky Jordan and Milt Thompson. And Guzman got some help from his teammates. Dykstra denied by a diving Robbie Alomar. Then the bottom of the fifth, Devo unloads on Schilling's pitch deep to right, tying the game at 4-all. Bottom of the sixth, John Olerud goes deep to right. Jays take the lead for good 5-4, go on to win by a final of 8-5. Al Leiter pitched 2 2/3 scoreless innings in relief of Guzman to earn the win. Dwayne Ward picked up the save. Schilling allowed just 3 earned runs over 16 innings in the NLCS, but gave up 6 on 8 hits last night. Devo with a pair of key hits.
Thank you. Devo, a great at-bat that you're battling with Schilling there in the third inning, where you fouled him off, you fought him, and then suddenly a pitch where I don't know if I've ever seen a guy looking more for a pitch in a perfect spot just for you. Tell me about that at-bat.
Well, all night he's been throwing me fastball up in the zone, and I had a strike on me, and I figured he hasn't thrown me anything off speed. So I was pretty much sitting inside, and he threw me a slider, and it was right there.
Devon White continues to be white hot for the Jays. He's batting 179 points higher now than during the regular season. Devo has scored 6 times and has driven in 4 runs in 7 postseason games. Devo, just one of the storylines in Game 1. On hand for all of last night's action at Skydome, Dan Patrick. In fact, Dan couldn't wait for Game 2, so he's already back there. And unlike last year, Dan, this time the Jays were victorious in Game 1. Dan?
Yeah. Thank you, Robin. Welcome back to Skydome, here with a few of my close friends a couple hours after Game 1. And as you mentioned, this year, unlike last year, the Blue Jays victorious. And you have 2 starters, both right-handers, who struggled last night. Both teams bring in lefties. One provides relief, Al Leiter. One does it in David West. Here to break it down a little bit further, Dave Campbell and Peter Gammons. Peter, we'll start with Al Leiter. Great story here. And here's a guy who's had the time of his life. He's taking home movies prior to the game. I think he got a few clips himself last night.
Well, he did, Dan. I mean, this is a great story. This is a guy that came here for Jesse Barfield in 1989. Went 4 years without winning a game for the Blue Jays, and then made his comeback after all the injuries this year. We knew this series would come down to middle relief, and in the first game, it was very clear. Leiter came in the 6th inning in a 4-4 game. Now, he had some trouble with a couple of infield hits, blooper, struck out John Kruk with the bases loaded with a great slider. Then he dominated his striking out Jim Eisenreich and got them to within 4 outs of the end, and Dwayne Ward, great job. In contrast, David West came into a 5-4 game, had a chance to keep it close, faced 2 batters. It was an 8-4 game. Game was over. David West has now faced 8 batters in the World Series in his life. Hasn't retired one.
Let's talk about Roberto Alomar. Being a former infielder, you probably looked at what he did with amazement last night. He giveth on offense, he taketh away on defense.
You know, if all the world is a stage, then baseball's answer is the World Series. And probably the greatest play since Phantom of the Opera last night, Robbie Alomar. This ball's behind first base, for goodness sake. John Olerud goes back, and here comes the Phantom. I mean, he did it behind first base. And then in the 6th inning, with the go-ahead run at second, he makes this play. And the scouting report on Alomar is he'll throw behind runners. And that made Larry Bowa stop the runner, Kevin Stocker, at third base. And I'll tell you, he's some kind of major league infielder. He's a treat to watch.
We'll be back plenty more as we preview Game 2. Also, Peter back with some of the dirt that he's been digging up on the Hot Stove League, including who's the next Astros manager. Robin, now back to you.
All right, gentlemen. To college football, first of all, last night's late action. We'll get to all the upsets later. BYU had an upsetting week last week, suffering its worst loss in school history, losing to UCLA by 54 points. Last night, the undefeated Fighting Irish Notre Dame marched into town. Now, these fans just got a little bit carried away. In the first quarter, no score. Ray Zeller gets the pitch. He runs over a couple of BYU defenders. On the way to the end zone, Irish up 7-0. The ground attack would leave the passing game wide open. Kevin McDougal has no problem finding Mike Miller. He makes some great moves on the 66-yard scoring play. Irish go up 24-0. They go on to win by a final of 45-20. The Cougars have allowed 113 points in their last 2 games. They were outgained by 300 yards last night against the Irish, who are now 6-0. Out west we go for Stanford, Arizona. That's Cardinal quarterback Steve Stenstrom at the helm. He's able to find Brian Manning behind the Arizona defense. That does not happen often. A 91-yard play, 10-0 Stanford. But Arizona battled back late in the game. Score tied 24-all. Steve McLaughlin, a 27-yarder to win it. Arizona erased a 17-point deficit to win 27-24. Stanford turned the ball over 7 times. Arizona improves to 6-0 for the first time in school history. The Wildcats are the only remaining undefeated team in the Pac-10. We certainly are glad you decided to share another Sunday morning with us. And the Toronto Blue Jays are certainly glad they acquired Dave Stewart, who just happens to be the most successful pitcher in playoff history. We'll hear from the MVP of the ALCS later in the morning in our Sunday conversation. We'll return to campus next for an upsetting day in college football. Bama didn't lose, but the Tide didn't win either. Pucker up to kiss your sister, not your mother, back in a flash.
Sports Weekly is brought to you by Budweiser, the king of beers, who reminds you friends know when to say when. And by Owens Corning. Make energy savings a touch easier with new Pink Plus insulation.
Back to college football. Saturday's schedule was filled with top 25 teams squaring off against one another. And it turned out to be a day for the underdog. We begin in the SEC with Alabama and Tennessee. 21 seconds left in the game. Quarterback Jay Barker scores a touchdown on the keeper. The Tide draws within 2 points. David Palmer replaces Barker at quarterback for the 2-point conversion. He's in. 17-all. Bama now 5-0-1. Florida now Auburn. Tigers' Frank Sanders scores on a 9-yard reverse. Auburn up 35-27. After Florida had tied the score at 35, Auburn's Scott Etheridge kicks the game winner, a 41-yard field goal. Tigers win 38-35. Big Ten rivals, first meeting between Michigan and Penn State. Todd Collins throws 16 yards to Mercury Hayes. Michigan up by 4. Penn State tried to take the lead, but the Nittany Lions were stopped 4 straight times inside the 5-yard line. The Wolverines hang on for the victory. Colorado at Oklahoma. A rough day for the Boomer Schooner and a rough day for the Sooners. Colorado halfback Lamont Warren lets it rip to Charles Johnson. The Buffs cruise 27-10. Virginia at #1 Florida State. Just another day at the office for Charlie Ward. Here he finds Tamarick Vanover. It goes for 86 yards. Ward accounted for 4 touchdowns. Florida State wins 40-14. Michigan State at Ohio State in the 4th. Jim Miller hits Scott Green And he gets into the end zone, game tied at 21. Late in the fourth, Raymond Harris takes it in from 7 yards out. Ohio State wins. Kansas State at Nebraska. Lawrence Phillips goes 46 yards for 6 points. Nebraska holds off the Wildcats 45-28. Washington at UCLA, a wonderful game for Bruin receiver J.J. Stokes makes the move after getting the pass from Mike Cook, and he has gone for a school record 95-yard touchdown. Stokes had 4 touchdown receptions. Syracuse at Pitt in the second. Marvin Graves throws 64 yards to Marvin Harrison. Orangemen now lead 24-21. Pitt driving. Curtis Martin stopped on 4th and 2 at the 3. Syracuse hangs on 24-21. Now for other scores from Saturday. Saturday, and Bino Cook is ready to put some meaning behind all those scores and highlights. So let's go back to Dick Schaap in New York. Dick?
Bino, if I remember correctly, the last time we chatted, Alabama, I believe, was your choice as the #1 team in the country, and Penn State was rushing toward the Rose Bowl. Was it me? Did I misunderstand you?
I can't hear you, Richard.
Oh,
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Bino. Well, I guess I want to know what happened in State College yesterday and what happened in Birmingham. Can you hear that?
Okay, the top 5 teams, somebody different in 5th place, Auburn. And Auburn can win the national title if they're the only team that finishes 11-0. Number 4, Nebraska. Nebraska has a shot at the national title. Things have to break. Number 3, Ohio State. Number 2, Notre Dame. And finally, the last person in the world not to vote for Florida State finally does. Florida State #1. Obviously, Florida State, Notre Dame will decide the national title. Alabama was unbelievable yesterday, Richard, about Alabama. Tennessee had them 17-9. They drove right down, got the touchdown, put Palmer in at the quarterback, and he ran it in for 2 points. Alabama still has a shot at the national title. Things have to break right, but they have a shot.
Okay, Bino, thank you for your help. I'm sorry we couldn't communicate, but I think
we can communicate now.
I think last week we had trouble communicating because that's when you told me that Alabama was #1 and Penn State was rushing to the Rose Bowl. But maybe I heard you wrong last week.
Well, I did pick Penn State to beat Michigan, and I do eat crow on that. And tomorrow's the 69th anniversary of the most famous day in the history of football, October 18th, 1924, Red Grange against Michigan, and the birth of the Four Horsemen.
Well, I like the way you changed the subject so quickly to get away from those choices last week. Next week, I'll remind you about Florida. Thanks for being with us today, Bino. Coming up next, German justice, the Monica Seles verdict.
The covered bridges of Madison County. They're even more magical now than when I was a boy. Hi, this is Mike Pace for Beneventi Chevrolet. You know, there are lots of places to buy a truck or van, but it's kind of like the bridges. Serve people well for over 60 years, and the word gets around. Beneventi Chevrolet Geo, Highway 141 in Granger. This is where you buy your Chevy truck.
What's your active endeavor? Active Endeavors offers a wide variety of apparel and accessories to outfit your active endeavors and is Iowa's largest Patagonia dealer. Active Endeavors, where your outdoor adventures begin.
Downtown Iowa City and University and 35th in West Des Moines.
Ultimate ESPN Sports Center highlight goes like this. Loose ball in the end zone. Fall on it, no chance. My feet are light, and I've got the moves. At the 50, I see Myers. Not now, Chris. I'm a busy man. And as I cross the goal line, I laugh, knowing my agent has just cut a deal for my very own fitness video. Yeah, that's my Sports Center highlight.
NBA preseason action, the Suns and the Warriors. Charles Barkley can't wait to get in the action, and KJ leads on the break. Finds Barkley for the slam. He had 19 points, 13 boards, and 8 assists. How about the Hawks and the Mavs? Quinn Buckner in his debut as the Mavs head coach. Rookie Jamal Mashburn with the reverse layup. He had 8 points. The Sixers and the Heat. Sean Bradley, a rough debut. Ronnie Cycli steals it from Bradley, goes the other way and slams it. Bradley, 3 of 21 from the floor. The Bulls and the Sonics. Bulls without Cartwright, Grant, and Pippen, and of course Michael Jordan. New Bull, Tony Kukoc with a beautiful around-the-back pass to Scotty Williams with a slam, but the Bulls drop 2 to the Sonics. Magic and the Spurs, Shaquille O'Neal, a sweet alley-oop slam. Shaq with 25 points and 11 boards. To the NHL, a dozen games on ice Saturday, the first home game of the young season for the Islanders as they hosted the Devils, the undefeated New Jersey Devils. Would they stay that way? Islanders on the power play. Alexander Semak steals the puck, breaks in, and scores. He had the hat trick. Devils win 6-3. The Rangers and the Flyers. Mark Recchi leaves the puck for Eric Lindros, who blasted by Glenn Healy. Flyers win. The Leafs and the Wings. Felix Potvin sweeps away the slap shot and then stonewalls Ray Shepard on the rebound. Leafs win 2-1. Blackhawks and the Jets. Crazy finish in OT. Scoreless game. Nelson Emerson behind the goal grabs the airborne puck with his glove and drops it into the goal. You've got to see this. Watch this. It clearly should have been no goal and a Jets penalty on Emerson, but it was ruled a Jets goal. Winnipeg wins it in OT. 1-0. Darryl Suter, no, not happy about that at all. Now for the rest of Saturday's results on the ice. On Wednesday, the man who admitted he stabbed Monica Seles was sentenced in Germany. For the heinous act, Gunter Parsch received a 2-year suspended sentence. There was such outrage over the light sentence that he asked to spend the night in jail, fearing he might be harmed. Parsch claimed he was not trying to kill Seles when he stabbed her April 30th, but prosecutors in Germany will appeal and want Parsch charged with attempted murder and sent to jail for at least 2 years. Now, Monica Seles released a statement after hearing of the suspended sentence. She said she was shocked and horrified. Her assailant gets to go back to his life, but she can't because she's still recovering from an attack that could have killed her. Seles went on to state that she was fearful for fellow athletes, public figures, and other potential victims of senseless crimes, knowing that a criminal who commits such an act will not be punished. It has been 4 days since we first learned that Parsch would be a free man, and it's still unbelievable. There's been much heated debate on whether or not Monica Seles has overreacted to what happened to her last April 30th. Now imagine this. You're 19 years old, #1 tennis player in the world. Then imagine you're on the court where you feel the safest. Your back is to the crowd on a changeover, and suddenly you're stabbed in the back with a knife, which leaves you scarred both physically and mentally. Then imagine your assailant in court testifying that he did indeed commit the crime. In fact, he stalked you, but he's not going to jail. Imagine that. Monica Seles does not have to. Despite her countless battles on the tennis court, the battle being disputed in a court of law has been the most damaging to Monica Seles. Coming up, we'll head back to Sky Dome for more on the World Series. We'll also look back on the playoffs. Lenny Dykstra was one of the heroes in Game 5 for the Phillies, and veteran Paul Molitor came through for the Jays. That and much more when we come back.
What do all these police officers have in common?
My name is Patrolman James New, and I was shot once, Bob Parcell, and I was shot right above the heart.
Every year, more police officers are shot.
Point-blank range.
Yet fewer die, thanks to an innovative DuPont fiber called Kevlar in bullet-resistant vests.
Tina Dillard, and I was shot twice at close range.
Being a police officer is always going to be dangerous, but it doesn't have to be fatal. DuPont, better things for better living.
The Major League Baseball season came to an end for two more teams this week. Not many thought the Braves would be on vacation quite this soon, especially the way they were scoring runs at a record pace. But over in the ALCS, the Chicago White Sox were suffering a power outage against the Toronto Blue Jays. Ron Karkovice, Bo Jackson, and Dan Pasqua were all held hitless. They didn't drive in a single run between them. Linda Cohn begins our look back on the playoffs in the AL.
Toronto wrapped up its return to the Fall Classic with 2 wins over the White Sox. Juan Guzman led the Jays on Sunday, allowing just 3 hits in 7 innings. The Blue Jays scored once in each of the first 4 innings, pinning the loss on Chicago ace Jack McDowell, who posted a series ERA of 10.
So he's putting a lot of pressure on himself, and he's not being the same Jack that I've seen in other occasions. With the type of character that Dave has and the way he's responded to big games in postseason play, that, you know, Tuesday night will be a big night for us.
Molitor proved prophetic. Pat Borders drove in 3 runs in the Jays' 6-3 victory. Stewart in the playoffs, 13 innings, 8 hits, 2.03 ERA with 2 victories.
The numbers are there, but, you know, it seems that people are still blinded by the things that I'm able to do on the baseball field at this time of year. Maybe it takes retirement and to be away from the game a while and the numbers to really stick out for people to say that, you know, when it was postseason, Dave Stewart was the man.
The White Sox batted .237 in the series and later released George Bell, who saw no action against Toronto. Action was not lacking in the senior circuit. Neither was Jackson. Danny drove in a run, held the Braves to a run, and the Phillies hung on through some tense moments to even the series at 2.
I proved a lot of people wrong tonight, and that was probably what gave me more incentive than anything else.
Kurt Schilling and the Phillies led 3-0 after 8.5 innings in Game 5, but the Braves rallied for 3, capped by Francisco Cabrera's RBI single. Mitch Williams escaped by striking out Mark Lemke with a runner on third with 1 out, and then Lenny Dykstra took over. The Dude nailed down a 3-2 series lead for Philadelphia with a 10th inning solo homer off Mark Wohlers.
Everybody's played their part, and today it was my turn. And you know, like I said, I like to be in the situation, and fortunately, I came up big today.
A lot of people thought that we were going to run away with this thing. We knew better than that. We knew what the Phillies were capable of doing.
The Phillies were capable of winning the series in 6 games. Tommy Green shut down the Braves, and the Phillies scored twice each in the 3rd, 5th, and 6th innings. Williams saved Game 6, and the celebration began.
Now the stretch. 3-2 pitch. Swing and a miss. Struck him out. Phillies are the 93 National League champions.
I still don't think anyone believes it now. You know, I think you're going to have to watch SportsCenter to find out that we did win.
They did make believers out of us. While the Phillies and the Jays play on, it's vacation time for the Sox and the Braves. No time off, though, for Peter Gammons. He's at Sky Dome in Toronto. And let's talk about the offseason for the Braves and the Sox. First of all, the Braves, they definitely need a closer. And what's going to be the situation? They have so many talented players. What are they going to do, Peter?
Well, Robin, they haven't even had time for John Schuerholz to take together all the organization and decide exactly what they're going to do. But there are a lot of questions. I mean, they have to find room for kids like Chipper Jones and probably Javi Lopez catching, but Chipper presents a problem. Now, they're probably going to have to erase some salary so they can go get a closer, and Brian Harvey is being marketed right now by the Marlins. But that means, you know, a lot of people are thinking, well, they're going to trade either Terry Pendleton to make room for Chipper Jones and or Ronnie Gant to make room for Ryan Klesko. But it'll be an interesting offseason because they're tough decisions because, as John Schuerholz has said many times, Terry Pendleton is such an important factor on that club in the clubhouse, very difficult to move.
All right, Peter, a lot of grumbling around with the White Sox toward the end of their series, and George Bell already gone right after the year ended. What do you hear about the White Sox, Peter?
Well, I think the first thing, man, Ron Schuler hasn't yet pulled his organization together either. There's been some speculation that Schuler might not come back. He turned down a long-term offer from owner Jerry Reinsdorf. My guess is he will come back. He's done a great job as general manager, and I know he'd really like to win. But the question there, they need a left-handed hitter. They need a middle infielder. They're going to have to decide what to do with Tim Raines. And Reinsdorf doesn't want to go too high on the salary. So most of the speculation over the next 2 months is going to be they have to decide whether or not they're going to trade Jack McDowell for a couple of younger players and fit some other holes, and then go with Fernandez and Beret and Alvarez and Baldwin as their top pitchers.
All right, Peter, how about some juicy tidbits starting in Houston with the managerial situation there?
Well, Bob Watson is still looking around, interviewing guys. Davey Lopes, the Orioles coach, is very high on his list. He and owner Drayton McClain really like Matt Galante, who's the one holdover coach that's been left in the organization. That's a possibility. He's going to interview Larry Boa, Bob Boone, who managed in Tacoma. I don't think he was going to interview Bobby Valentine, but Bobby Valentine got to the owner, Drayton McClain, and now he's going to get an interview. And I don't think it's out of the possibility that Valentine could talk his way into this thing.
All right, Peter, we'll check back with you later. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Robin.
Coming up, Mike Lupica and Bill Conlon will face off. The bone of contention, whether or not the Atlanta Braves are the Buffalo Bills of baseball. Always a cast of characters on face-off, and quite a cast of characters in Philly. Are these guys now America's team? They're not exactly clean-cut, but they certainly have a distinctive style all their own. We'll be back in a moment.
I can think of at least 3 things from Philadelphia that give me a bad case of indigestion. The famous steak sandwich, watching Rocky Balboa eat raw eggs for breakfast, and being a Phillies fan. Because this team likes to win games in the 10th inning, so you got to watch the whole thing down to the last home run. And for fans, that can be as nerve-wracking as climbing up the side of a cliff. Just before Curt Schilling carries you up to the top, Mitch Williams sends you bungee jumping off the edge. You just never know what's going to happen next with Wild Thing. The entire team defies logic and at least 2 laws of science, gravity and physics. How else could you explain a body like Inky's making a great catch? Or John Kruk being able to see the ball past his cheeks late in the game? But somehow they made it to the series, and if they win the whole thing, they'll go to the White House. I hope they don't get too cleaned up. Nobody would recognize them.
It is time for Face Off, our weekly war of words, wit, and wisdom, and time to address the demise of the Atlanta Braves. The 3rd year in a row, Turner's tots have been turned into postseason chopped liver. 2 years ago, Kirby Puckett did his General Sherman impression and raised Atlanta. Last year, it was Dave Winfield who stopped the chop. And last week, Lenny Dykstra sent the Braves gone with the wind, which raises the inevitable question, are the Braves the Bills of baseball? Is Atlanta athletically Buffalo South, or is tomorrow another day? That's the subject of our face-off today between Scarlet and Red. Mike Lupica of the New York Daily News, the man people in Buffalo are least likely to send chicken wings to, and Bill Conlon of the Philadelphia Daily News, who will accept chicken wings and most other food.
Oh, Dick.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lupica, you may lead off.
I hate to do this to the Atlanta Braves. They gave me what I thought was the best pennant race I've ever seen. I think John Schuerholz is one of the smart guys in baseball. But when you come into October with the best team 3 times in a row and come away without a World Series ring, there are the Buffalo Bills of baseball.
How could you trash a team that just gave us such penultimate drama? They play almost 35 games over 500 down the stretch.
It's a beautiful
thing.
They
give us 4 Cy Young Award candidates, MVP candidates all over the place. They play very well against this year's Destiny's team. One of the great columns I read out of Minnesota 2 years ago was you saying that was the greatest World Series of all time, and we're not the Braves a participant in that wonderful World Series?
I wish I could say differently, and thank you, by the way, it was a great column. But the fact is, they have a 5-13 record in 1-run games in the postseason the last few years. They lose the last 2 games in Minnesota. They lose the last game against Toronto, and now this time, Bill, other teams have only won once.
But you're putting them in with a team that gets blown out, that gets carried off the field, that calls for ambulances to go back to the hotel afterwards. I mean, just a team that doesn't come from a weak league. I think the Braves have provided baseball in losing with some of the great drama that we've had in the modern baseball era.
That's what they'll probably say to Bobby Cox the next time he gets a manager's job. Don't win, Bobby, but if you could possibly provide us with great drama, that's why they keep score. The Orioles only won once in the late 60s, early 70s. The A's only won once. At least they won once.
Now, I say next year the Braves finally get there and they finally maybe win the World.
You will finally settle this next year.
Not to mention they just stuck them in our division.
I promise you, Bill and Mike will be back on the hour, joined by Roy Johnson for today's edition of the Sports Reporters. More of their opinions on the World Series and on the key matchups in the National Football League and on the verdict in Germany. Robin?
Yes, from Brooklyn.
For the first time in a very long time, Dan Marino will not be at the controls for Miami. We'll look back on another injury-marred week in the NFL next.
What do all these police officers have in common?
My name is Patrolman James New, and I was shot once by Parcell, and I was shot right above the heart.
Every year, more police officers are shot.
Point-blank range.
Yet fewer die, thanks to an innovative DuPont fiber called Kevlar in bullet-resistant vests.
Tina Dillard, and I was shot twice at close range.
Being a police officer is always going to be dangerous, but it doesn't have to be fatal. DuPont, better things for better living.
Why is it always the same old story? Why ask why? Try a less...
Coming up right after Sunday Sports Day on NFL Game Day, big trouble in Cleveland. We'll look at the ever-growing feud developing between Bill Belichick and Bernie Kosar. The big rematch of last year's NFC Championship game, the Niners and the boys. We'll focus on the men who lead the offenses, Troy Aikman and Steve Young. Then tonight at 7 Eastern, you'll find all the day's highlights on NFL Primetime. When the Miami Dolphins face the Indianapolis Colts next Sunday night at Joe Robbie Stadium, it will mark the first time since December 16, 1983, that Dan Marino will not be the Dolphins' starting quarterback. A torn Achilles tendon has ended Marino's streak of 145 consecutive starts. Marino's season-ending injury was the story of the week around the NFL, but as Chris Myers reports, there was one team in the NFC East that was unleashing a giant-sized surprise.
Week 6 in the NFL featured a shocker at RFK. This Dave Meggett to Mike Sherrard touchdown pass accounted for 6 of the 41 points the Giants scored on the Skins. The 41-7 drubbing was the worst Washington loss at home in 45 years.
I think we were beaten in every department. I think it's probably the longest day I've ever spent at RFK Stadium.
Can it be? Now 1-4. Washington, the same record as New England. The Patriots earned their first victory of the season at Phoenix, in part due to this Kevin Turner catch and then the lateral to Leonard Russell. Russell sprinted down the sidelines before being stopped just short of the end zone. The Pats scored the game-winning touchdown moments later. The Cowboys continue to roll. Jay Novacek rumbling up the middle for 6 on a fake field goal, and Dallas had their 3rd straight win. The Jets had the same idea, but holder Louis Aguiar floated the pass into the hands of Eddie Anderson for an interception. But New York's battle with the Raiders was decided with less than a minute to go in the game. Trailing 20-17, backup quarterback Vince Evans allowed to complete a pass to Tim Brown while the clock started late. Brown tackled at the 1. Los Angeles had no timeouts remaining, but after a delay, 7 seconds put back on the clock, Nick Bell scored on the next play, the running play, to give the Raiders a 24-20 win. A couple of quarterbacks were unable to engineer such dramatic victories. Warren Moon struggled in Houston's 28-point loss at Buffalo, and Cody Carlson has been named the new Oilers starter.
Pride's a little hurt, my ego's a little hurt. And I think a lot of people finally got what they wanted. Both the media and fans, they got exactly what they wanted.
And the Cleveland Browns announced that Vinny Testaverde will start in place of the ineffective Bernie Kosar at Cincinnati. The completed forward pass seemed to be a difficult task this week. Philadelphia's Bubby Brister hand-delivered 2 interceptions in a loss to Chicago. Brett Favre was victimized by Denver's Mike Kroll. And the aforementioned Warren Moon got picked by Cornelius Bennett, and Corey Miller did the same to Mark Rippon. Frightening injuries ended the season for 3 players, most notably Dan Marino. A torn Achilles tendon has ended his string of 145 straight starts.
I guess you could say that the odds have caught up with me from that standpoint. Playing 145 games in a row is something a lot of guys have never done or gotten close to. So, I guess it was a matter of time. I just wish it wouldn't have been this year.
For the second year in a row, Steve Edman has had his season cut short. The Colt defensive lineman tore ligaments and tendons in his right knee. And Chicago wide receiver Wendell Davis tore tendons in both knees, trying to catch a pass against the Eagles. The Green Bay Packers traded for Eric Dickerson on Tuesday, but the running back failed his physical because of a spinal injury, and Coach Mike Holmgren believes the condition made it too risky for Dickerson to play. The Braves are out and the Falcons are in. For Deion Sanders, the outfielder has now returned to cornerback and played Thursday night against the Rams. And Patriot safety Corwin Brown was fined $3,500 for hitting Derek Ware with the crown of his helmet. But that wasn't the only vicious hit of the past week.
It's back to the Sky Dome when we come back. The Jays were impressive at the plate, and they also came up with some defensive gems last night. More in the Fall Classic in a moment.
The covered bridges of Madison County. They're even more magical now than when I was a boy. Hi, this is...
I'll tell you, with no time to waste, NFL Prime Monday is the place. 90 minutes of X's and O's from Theismann, James, Jaworski, and the rest of our pros. We've got roundtables with sports writers galore and Chris Mortensen with the story behind the score. We'll have live reports from the Monday night game and backstage with Julie Brown. She'll entertain. No matter who you are, no matter what you know, NFL Prime Monday. That's your show.
NFL Prime Monday, tomorrow at 7:30 Eastern, only on ESPN.
Welcome back to a rainy, drizzly, gray, miserable day in Toronto. Had this been in Philadelphia, this kind of weather, Game 2 might be in jeopardy. But here in Toronto, with the climately controlled Sky Dome, it should be beautiful weather for tonight's Game 2. Hello once again, I'm Dan Patrick. Dave Campbell and Peter Gammons will join me momentarily as we look back on Game 1, which is what Gary Miller does, taking a look at the man in the middle and the man up the middle.
Against a team that hits and scores as freely as the Phillies, Roberto Alomar's ability to negate offense becomes crucial. His leaping dive in the 5th kept the Phils from getting more than a run ahead.
I felt like I kind of messed up that play by turning the wrong way, but, you know, then as I turn around, I see Alomar diving for it, and, you know, well, where'd he come from?
He played like a rover in the softball game tonight. He was everywhere. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. That's just being a good player. And he saved him a couple runs tonight.
Alomar was at it again in the pivotal 6th inning, knocking down a ground single to save another run.
Roberto, I mean, I know he didn't. None of the plays he made tonight surprised me because I've seen him do it so many times. He's a luxury. When we played together in San Diego, I just stood right on the line and moved to the base because he got everything else. You know, he's just nothing he did surprise me.
Having seen ex-teammate Alomar's latest acrobatics, it was time for Kruk to step up and Al Leiter to step forward.
Bases loaded, 2 outs, and just threw a nice little fastball. It ran away from him a little bit, and it was about knee-high, and it was a perfect pitch, I mean, for him especially, and he swung through it, and I got a little excited.
Cito Gaston still hasn't let on how his rotation runs after Game 3, but now what seemed like a vacancy from the left side of the mound is looking like a strength that he can go to several times instead of just once.
Al Leiter, a guy who grew up as a Philly fan, got a tryout by the Phillies in high school. Dave Campbell, Peter Gammons joining me once again as we look back on Game 1. Let's talk about some of the things in defeat for the Phillies. Anything that you saw that maybe they were forewarned about coming into the World Series?
Yeah, Dan, advanced scouting, I think, is so important. I mean, these clubs saw each other in spring training a lot, but the Blue Jays really have a new roster this year. I mean, they got 12 new players. But Jimmy Stewart and Ray Shore, who did the advanced scouting, I think spotted a couple of things that helped the Phils last night, especially in base running situations. 1 ball, 2 strike counts is when the Phillies ran, and that's because Juan Guzman has the tendency to throw the breaking ball on 1 and 2. Borders makes a good play, but has no chance to get Dykstra here. Lenny in easily, And then Mariana Duncan, same count. 1 ball, 2 strikes, takes off, steals the base without even a throw from Pat Borders. And then you're going to see, after a triple by Duncan, Larry Bowa is saying, remember, this guy throws a lot of wild pitches. Be ready to go. And boom. Gets a great break off third. Duncan in before Borders could get the ball. So the advanced scouting, even though it didn't pay off for the Phillies last night, certainly came into play. And one of the key things about advanced scouting is defensive positioning, and we'll see how that plays out during the series.
I want to ask you about the home run swings. Olerud and Devon White, not exactly the guys you expect, but big situational hitters.
Well, what this shows is not only how many ways the Blue Jays can beat you, but how many ways Devon White really has become a star. I mean, Dave Stewart says he sets up pitchers better than anyone. We heard him earlier talking about how he kept having Schilling beat him inside. He came back in with a slider and he hit it 8 miles. And this Olerud swing, I mean, he can stay back on a breaking ball so well. And that perfect swing, hits a home run. But I'll tell you, I think maybe the country's going to find out that Devon White is really one of the great all-around players of the game. I thought he should have been starting in the All-Star game. I think we've seen he really is the real thing.
I was sitting next to Peter when Olerud hit his home run, and Peter says that's the prettiest thing in baseball. We'll be back a little bit later on this morning as we take a look at Game 2. Robin will be back as she takes a look at something that happened 25 years ago this past weekend.
Iowa did pepper it with the Vietnam War still raging. It saw the tragic assassinations of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. It was a time of awakening for millions of young Americans, both black and white, who actually believed they could make a difference. As Shelley Smith reports, in sport, it was the year of Tommy Smith and John Carlos and their Black Power victory stand salute at the Mexico City Olympics. It's hard to believe that 25 years ago yesterday marked the anniversary of the protests against the treatment of not only black athletes, but of all black Americans.
The act sent a lightning bolt through the United States. Communities, black and white, were stunned by what some called acts of courage and others called acts of treason.
Smith and Carlos didn't plan a protest by themselves. I think Harry Edwards exploited Smith and John, and he used them for his own movement, and he exploited them 100%. Tommy Smith couldn't find a job. Carlos never got a steady job. Carlos never went back and got his degree. Harry Edwards went on to Berkeley as a full professor. He's a race relation man with the 49ers and a couple of other professional baseball, he and Peter Ueberhoff and all that BS, you know. And nothing's happened to him. But these two young men got kicked in the fanny and they went down in the mud.
There was a tremendous price paid by everybody involved, and John and Tommy paid a particularly high price. As far as myself was concerned, I was immediately fired from my teaching job at San Jose State and placed on the FBI's rabble-rouser index for the next 10 years. And of course, the same thing that happened with John and with Tommy also impacted me. I mean, every place that I go, every job that I've applied for, everything that I've ever been involved in, explained to us 1968.
Tommy Smith is now the track coach here at Santa Monica College near Los Angeles. John Carlos is the track coach at Palm Desert High School near Palm Springs. Neither will do interviews anymore without being paid.
I think that that's their business. I think that they are not sociologists. They are not historians. They are people whose reputations, whose names are marketable commodities to some extent.
Sociologists and historians agree that such a protest in today's Olympic arena would be unlikely and would hardly cause worldwide outrage. But there is still a stigma that blankets the members of the 1968 track and field team. It is still the only Olympic group never to be invited to the White House for the traditional post-game celebration. Black members of the team still are asked, were you the one?
Of course, the way you correct that is ask people if they can read, because the names of the individuals were Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and my name is Charles Green.
White members are asked where they stood.
When I came home, I was a teacher in a high school, and remember, I was 37 years old, and the principal of our high school said, what did you think about all of that? And I said, I agreed with their position. And he said, well, I think they should have all been sent back to Africa.
The question that still surrounds Smith and Carlos is, was it worth it? Did they make a difference?
It shook up the good old boy system tremendously in this country and the IOC. You got women on the IOC now. You got more minorities on the IOC.
The movement that Martin Luther King had got going, it needed this also to complete his dream.
I think that history will look upon all of this as a watershed period in terms of our understanding of sport and society.
Or will it?
Youngsters probably don't know their names. They probably don't know their names. They don't know the name of Harry Edwards, who was associated with these two athletes. They really don't know what they stood for or what they were, and certainly they don't know the message which they were trying to get across because they just don't know of them.
A major movie deal is now in the works with Warner Brothers and director Oliver Stone, which will bring Smith, Carlos, and Edwards a considerable sum for their rights to their story. There is also some talk about this team being honored at the '96 Summer Games in Atlanta. We'll be right back with a Sunday Conversation with the Jays' Dave Stewart. 7 seasons, Dave Stewart was the man Oakland A's manager Tony La Russa wanted on the mound come crunch time in the playoffs. After all, Oakland appeared in 4 league championship series during Stewart's years there. Over the winter, Stewart signed with the Blue Jays and has become just what they wanted him to be, their money man come playoff time. He hopes to make another deposit tonight and help the Jays take a 2-game lead over the Phillies. He talks with our Peter Gammons.
What is your definition of a money pitcher?
My definition is a guy that does what it takes, and when he's doing what it takes, he wins.
What makes you such a money pitcher?
That's a tough question. I really don't know. I just know that I'm willing to do what it takes. I have me, and that's what I bring to the ballpark every day. And I think me is enough to do what it takes to win a ball game. I believe that there is nothing or anyone that can step between me and getting my job done. I believe that on that given day, that the hitter is not a factor. What's a factor is whether I make a mistake or not. And I'm not willing to make that mistake to let him beat me. Our backs were against the wall, and we had just taken a tough loss with Robbie Alomar hitting the home run off of Eck, and we took that loss. We came in that day, and I don't know what got into me. I always have a way of putting my foot in my mouth at sometimes, but I came in and told the guys, if the sun doesn't shine, I will, and I guarantee we'll win tomorrow. You guys just make sure you get to the ballpark. We're going back to Toronto, so just be ready to make the trip. And it was in the headlines the next day, and I was so nervous about that incident that I couldn't sleep the night before. And I remember I got up and I said, well, this might not be the proper thing to do, especially if I lose, but I went to one of my favorite places over in San Francisco, and I bartended that night and had a pretty good time. I got in kind of late, came back the next day, and I was able to beat him 6-2. And so, even though it was a freak that it happened, it did happen. And I felt real good about that win because, it gave us hope.
There still must be some great memories. What are your fondest of pitching in Oakland?
I got thousands of them. The first thing I think about is Tony La Russa's being appointed to the ball club as our manager and me getting my first start with him as a manager. He was in Florida, and we were in Milwaukee, and he calls me from Milwaukee, and the first time he calls, he says, this is Tony La Russa. And I said, yeah, right. And he says, no, seriously, this is Tony La Russa. I said, yeah, right. Okay, well, this is Tony La Russa. He says, I want you to pitch my first ball game. I says, Tony's not here, man. Quit playing jokes. And I hung up the phone. So he calls back, and he says, this is Tony La Russa. And I said, okay. And so he says, I want you to start the first ball game. I said, I'm going to be coming in and I want you to start the first game in Boston. And so I said, he says, can you handle that? I said, sure, no problem. So he says, it's a game of the week. It's a Monday night game of the week. And I said, well, so what? And he says, you're going to be pitching against Roger Clemens. And I said, oh, really? He says, does that scare you? I said, all I can do is the best I can do.
How important is it to you to earn the kind of respect you've earned in situations like that, outside of the game as well as in the game?
To me, the respect you earn out of the game is more important than what you earn in the game. The things that you carry out of the game are for lifetime. What you do on the baseball field, in the next generation, it'll probably be forgotten. If they don't see it on film, nobody will ever remember that I was 8-0 in the ALCS. Nobody ever remember that I had 421 seasons, unless you're a baseball buff. But things that you do to affect the life are things that will carry forever, because that goes from generation to generation. And somebody will say, well, Dave Stewart did this, or he taught me this, or he was able to create this situation to make it possible so I can do this. Those things are generation to generation. Those are lifetime. The baseball game will continue on. This game was played by Babe Ruth. Where is Babe Ruth?